This evening, we have with us Susan Barossi. People up at home may see a very not clear image behind me, I'm assuming, of Susan. Hopefully you'll be able to hear her. So I think what we are going to do is start the meeting off with our auditor's report, because I think, Susan, you're doing double or triple duty tonight, right? So you've got to go.
Yes, sorry, and I'm sorry not to be there. I broke my ankle, so I'm sorry. This is the first meeting I've ever was not there to visit me, so I apologize.
Oh, wow.
So, okay.
Hope you feel better, yes. Oh, wait, hold on one second, Susan. Just from a timing perspective, we have about, what, 20 minutes or so? Half hour, you think?
Yeah,
Or-
20 minutes, 20 minutes.
Okay, great.
Maureen, do you have the PowerPoint to put up on the screen, or do you
I,
want me to put it up?
wait, can you share, can you share your screen, Susan, or,
Or you know what, if you put it up, and then I'll just tell you which slide, like 1, 2, 3.
can you do that?
Because we're gonna do this jointly, right? Okay.
All right, you know what, Susan, I think, does the board all have it in front of them? Because Melissa was saying if we do it, then we
Yeah,
won't
we're
have
not-
Susan
We're
up.
on the same computer as the computer projected, is the image of you now, so.
I mean, I think you could speak through it, Susan, if we don't bring it up, because it is part of it's part of the public record, so people, most of it is in the board pack.
That's fine. Here tonight is to present financials for fiscal year ending June 30, 2021. And there's financials that you have there, which are approximately about 100 pages. And that is for the financial statements for the school district. In the beginning part of those financials, there is a very detailed obligation to affordability. Let's go to the next. These are just, what happened at the end of the day, this 100-page package, what gets issued, or an opinion gets issued. And what was that opinion? It was unmodified opinion, the cleanest opinion that you could receive. Then I told you that we go to review the internal controls, not to give an opinion on internal controls, we give an opinion on the financial statements, to look at the controls in conjunction with the context of the audit. We looked at any accounting estimates, receivables, there might be accruals that need to be made, payables that need to be made, management had to make estimates. And we felt that the management's estimates were all reasonable. Audit adjustments discussed with management. In fact, there is a whole report to governance, which is given to the audit committee and the board. And in there is the listing of journal entries, which are really long. We spoke about the MD&A. There were no disagreements with management. If there were, we felt that there were issues, we did directly to the board and the audit committee. There were no consultations by management with other accounts. What do I mean? Well, maybe, sometimes we might come up with a journal, or we might say you have to handle something a specific way, and this district goes, we really don't agree with that. We're going to go to another CPA firm to get their opinion, and they get their opinions. That did not need to be done. Independence, not impaired. Now let's go to slide 4. This is where I'm going to ask Maureen to chime in with me.
Okay.
on this. Okay, so here, this is the general fund, which I said is the operational fund, and these are 5 columns, okay?
Susan, it's actually slide 3, I think.
No, it's slide 4.
Slide 4, Mike.
Slide 4.
It's just numbered as 3. It's numbered as 3.
Page 3, in my PDF, it's 4. Page 3?
Yeah.
It says 3 on it, but I guess it's page 4 in the PDF, okay.
Okay, page 3, yes. Tricky. This is the, first column is the original budget, right, which is the, budget that you have. The final budget is the, includes any amendments that were approved by the board to the original budget. And then there is the actually what happened. Then there are the encumbrances, which are purchase orders issued and outstanding, in which invoices have not been received. And then there's a variance between the final budget and the actual, thus the encumbrances. You're saying here, well, how come the original budget appears unbalanced? This is not unbalanced. These are amounts that were designated to be used in order to balance the budget. Maureen, I don't know if you want to talk about
Yeah, sure.
the 0.5 million.
Sure. So what Susan's referring to, in the first column on your original budget, you'll see that the amount listed for total revenues in the first column is different from your total expenditures. And when we speak about the budget, we always speak about, which is true, we do have to have propose something that is in balance. The difference between those two numbers, or the amount of planned fund balance we were using to close the difference between the original budget and the expenditure budget being proposed. So then, as Susan had mentioned, and we'll go into greater detail about what, usually we kind of at a high level highlight the things in which, what our planned revenues were and why, what was the difference between the plan, what we anticipated and where we ended up, as well as expenditures. And really what this slide does is kind of gives you a high level of what we have planned, what actually happened, and what the difference, either positive or negative variance of those two numbers. And that amount kind of, is where either you have additional fund balance, and that's what, how those numbers, when we transition to the next slide. But in terms of our total revenues and expenditures over the course of the year, and I know we had discussed it at different points, particularly for this 2021 school year, when we had developed that budget, it was at a time when the state revenues at that point in time, we were being told to project a reduction of about 25% in state and federal revenues, and that was given to us by the Office of the State Controller and the budget, New York State Office of Budget. So when we had developed the budget for this year, it was at a time with COVID, there was an uncertainty about overall revenues. And then subsequent to that, as we all know, there was money that came in from the federal government as well as the state. The revenues, I believe, were not as bad as they initially had projected them to be. That in itself was about $1 million of additional revenue that we had reduced our budget by, based upon, at the time, what was being told to us. And what in fact happened is that we did in fact receive all our revenues during that year. And that's not an unusual thing. Most districts, and speaking to my colleagues, many districts like us who took that advice and budgeted and planned for that, we obviously received more, so we're going to have a positive variance there. And really with the revenues, the two main drivers, in a typical year, you're always going to have a variance because you're going to, typically you budget more conservatively on revenues and expenditures than you anticipate. And then if there are some additional, funds, whether it be sales tax or tuitions, you're typically going to have a positive variance of maybe a few $100,000. In this particular year, we had about $1 million of state and federal aid that was not anticipated that we received, as well as about in local sales tax revenues, we also projected, again, based upon estimates given to us by the county, about a 25% reduction. And in fact, the sales tax revenue grew by about 20%. So that was about a 45% variance there. So the good news is that we did end up in a very positive note, even coming off a very difficult year in terms of expenses, but we did end up seeing a large amount of revenues unanticipated, not unanticipated, that ended up with federal restoration. We ended up receiving our full revenue package that we would have typically seen. And then on the expenditure side, just some highlights of where we found some expenditure savings, particular in our transportation costs were about $400,000 less last year than budgeted, mostly due to students whose parents chose not to send them to their out-of-district placements last year. And we've discussed this at other meetings, that one bus for a particular school could be about $80,000. So even just a slight change in our out-of-district busing, we had about a $400,000 or so reduction in cost. And typically our transportation budget runs higher, so that was one area of savings. And then the remainder was a combination of we didn't run our modified sports program last year, as well as a lot of the co-curriculars hadn't run. So there was about a $200,000 or $300,000 savings all totaled in those areas. And again, there was other savings if we went line by line, but kind of some of the big bucket areas. And then in the area of special education, we also had some students last year that were on home instruction. Their parents held them at home, so we either didn't have to hire the aides or pay the tuition for those students 2021. Now those students are back in programs this year, but we had about a $700,000 savings in the area of special education last year. Also, there was many of the service providers or typical services children receive. I think we had about a $400,000 savings in OT, PT, and other kind of services that are contracted out each year. So many of them, although we did have expenditures on the other side that we saw with COVID last year, this was kind of the big bucket savings that were, sometimes you're going to have those anyway, but I think these were particularly driven by our COVID last year, both on the revenue and expenditure side. So, Susan, do you want to go to the next slide, or do you want to say more about this one?
And then, thank you for going through that, because at the end, there's the $10.1 million fund balance. Now, that would be the general fund. But that's not all free and clear, because you're going to take slide 4, okay? That slide is the fund balance slide. Let's go there with that. It's page 4. And that breaks down the fund balance for the school district itself. cannot be filled unless, number one, it meets the purpose, and number two, if there are board resolutions, approving those amounts being put into those buckets. So of that 10.1 million, 2.1 is exactly at the 4%, and then there are amounts assigned, 1 million for what they call those encumbrances. There's restricted amounts, 7 million, and then there are balances in there, inclusive in there, for the subsequent year, the employee retirement system, to use to balance the subsequent year's budget. And there is an amount there, the 512,685, the subsequent year's expenditures. Anything there that, and also the tax service for the subsequent years. So it's very detailed there, what makes up that 10.1 million. And as Maureen said, the reason for positive revenues was last year, 20% of those state revenues were deferred because the district had really basically, all the districts were insured, they were going to be collectible. And there's 1,000 amounts to be able to collect it as revenues this year, but they were wisely put into these different buckets. Anything else that you want to comment on this, Maureen?
No, but other than where we ended up year over year is our fund balance, the net of what we showed you on, I guess, slide 3, not 4, was that the overall change in fund balance year over year was $1 million. So last fiscal year, we ended at about like 9 and change, and now we're at 10.1 million. And again, primarily driven by having those revenues that were unanticipated at the time of budget development. But as Susan said, some of it was also timing. We can, at a finance committee, and as we start talking about our budget process, we can get more into details about what we currently have in fund balance and the anticipated timeframe in which, we'll be using those. But I think, as Susan had mentioned, things such as tax certiorari is an example for those who may not be familiar. Those are for claims that are against the district that are actually due and payable, typically within a few years. So those are not for homeowners, but for commercial businesses and co-ops and such. And currently, I think it might be 13 million in outstanding claims, and we only have $1 million reserved for that. I'm not saying we're going to pay out 13 million. It'd be more likely over the course of time they'll be settled for about 40% or a third of that total amount that is outstanding. But those are real liability obligations that the district has, whether it's today, tomorrow, but within the next few years. And Susan, I'm not going to get into the how long you're allowed to hold on to that money, but there's some very strict guidelines about how much money you can fund in your fund balances, and they have to be associated with real payable obligations that you have in the near future. So, the good news is that we did end up in a place better than I think we initially anticipated we would be in, and primarily due to getting our full revenues. I think that positions us in a really good place as we start our budget process beginning this year, because we now are pretty confident not only will we not, be worried about that dip in state revenues, but we're anticipating, or at least the state's anticipating, that funding source to continue, and that not be a question as we have more. It'll be easier to develop the budget going forward because we have more information. That's good. I think the last few years with a lot of uncertainty it was very difficult. But I think that being said, although we were a little bit more conservative in those projections, it landed us in at the end of this fiscal year, we ended up in a good place, considering coming out of a tough time. And we'll need that because the next few years, this will help us meet our obligations that we do have. So that's about it. Do you have anything else, Susan, on that side?
No? And,
Okay.
any questions?
I have a question, Maureen. I'm sure this is a very simple
Sure.
answer. I'm just not seeing it. If you go to slide 4, page 3,
Yep.
where the item that says fund balance beginning of year,
Yep.
the original budget, the final budget, and the actual. Can you just explain to me why I get the difference, the slight difference between the original and the final, but why is the actual 7 million? I know that we didn't think we were going to spend as much, but was it to the tune of $7 million?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, what column are you looking at right there?
I'm looking at So page 4,
Yep,
or slide 4.
yeah, slide
Page
3,
three,
yeah. mhm.
The line item that says fund balance beginning of year, so it's about, it's under other financial sources uses, there's transfers out, there's net
The 9
change in
million?
Fund, yeah.
No, no, 9 million, that's what I mentioned, last year, our fund balance was at $9 million.
but why
And we'd
were-
increased by 1
But
million.
why did we originally budget at 2.5
Nope.
and 2.7?
No, no, that's not how we budgeted. That was our anticipated use of fund balance at the beginning of the year. It doesn't align the way the lines on top
Okay,
do. We
it
had
doesn't.
9 million
All right.
at the end of fiscal year, and then there's kind of some ebbs and flows, and then, where it ended up was, it was $1 million increase in that. It doesn't flow the same as the top
Okay.
of the, but yes, there was not a,
It's not really original
correct. It's
final
not as
actual.
though
Okay.
we planned 2 and then use 9
I
or
see.
something, yeah.
Okay. And then I just have another question
Sure.
for you. So it seems like we have a nice fund. Are we allowed to invest that? Do we invest that money so we can anticipate more next year? I mean, not, crazily, and, like 2%.
You're limited.
Yeah, we're limited.
Because a school district cannot, they're very limited as what they can put their money
Yes.
into. Okay, in fact, I gotta tell you, I had another district, they got some money, they issued a bond, they got some money, and they put it in, they didn't have an account in the capital projects fund, and they put it in cash account in the general fund. And we said, no, you're not supposed to do that, so you're very limited, you can't put monies into like, a Morgan Stanley account,
Right. No, I wasn't suggesting like we play the market. I just thought even if we make 1 or 2% a year, that's a nice
Oh, no,
little bump.
we we
allowed to do that?
yeah, we are allowed to
that's
do
great
that. So
news.
we do have interest income. I mean,
Yeah.
it in the past was much better. I think this year was maybe like 40,000 we made in interest income.
that's good.
Yeah, we usually do. I mean, there's times we've made a few 100,000. What Susan was mentioning too is when you have like a bond, which is a capital expenditure, there's some, you can make arbitrage on it, but you do have to return that money back to the general fund. So it was the way they kind of,
Right.
they were probably where they were accounting for it in their financials. So, but to Susan's point, there are a couple of vehicles that you can use. You are restricted. Years ago, when I was first here, we used to do short-term CDs for like, we would buy them, like when we get our
Right.
tax money, we would buy them for like 60 days. And then it ended up that our, many of our check, or just our savings accounts were paying more interest, so that's why we don't do
Yeah.
that. But we're constantly, we definitely look at that. We actually have multiple bank accounts, one of which pays a higher interest rate, so when we get the tax money, we leave what we're required to in JP Morgan Chase, and if the other one is paying more, we put the money in. You know what I mean? Like, because we're only allowed a certain amount of transfers a year,
Yeah.
so we do that, though, yes. Whoever's paying us most, we get an interest update each month or even every few weeks, and we move it according to that,
Awesome.
yeah.
Thanks,
so,
Maureen.
You're
That's
welcome.
great.
Yeah, it used to be a lot more, but,
I really do, management, Maureen and her team wrote that, management discussion analysis. Also I want to give a big thank you to Nick Macri and the rest of your team, Maureen, and Gary, and then the rest of the team there. That management discussion analysis is excellent. I think this is one of the best ones that you guys wrote, and, it's very well written, and it really explains what happened with the district. Any other questions? Well, I hope to be, I live very close by, which is disappointing to me that I'm not there. So I hope to be physically there next year. And thank you.
Hope you feel better, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Guys,
much.
bye.
Bye.
fine.
Did you have a
Doug, can I
question?
jump in? Yeah. Maureen, can you just go back a couple years? When you mentioned we might have commercial liabilities for Tax Centauri, is that something that's been pretty consistent, or is that 5 years ago, would that number have been similar? Are we looking at new commercial liabilities? And anything you could add on that, when you said we might settle for 40%?
Sure.
Are we talking 5 years out, 10 years out? Or is it not easy to play that?
Well, some, what typically happens, so people found, this is the unfortunate part about it, and some were building for multiple years, and from my understanding, some of the attorneys that bring these filings against the district, they prefer them to build up because then they get a larger chunk of the settlement, right? So they may not push it. A few years back, one of the judges locally who was in charge of those settlements was pushing them. So there was a time in which they were getting settled a little bit quicker. But in terms of, I would say right now, there's currently a few that are, what I would say, within the next 2 to 3 years are going to settle. Particularly, the larger ones we've settled recently are places like, what is the one on Jackson, Clairwood. Clairwood, and places like that, because when the town decided to go for the reeval of all the properties, we had hoped that they would make the condo and co-ops considered homestead. They're still being taxed as non-homestead, which means they're being taxed as a commercial entity, all the co-ops, condos in the town of Greenberg. And they really are the ones that have had the largest settlements, and they still have the potential for the largest settlements. So that being said, there's a few that we still owe to some of those similar type housing locations in town, and those could potentially, if they settle within the next few years, eat up the entire amount there. I mean, you could also, a lot of districts, if you don't have money, the way you deal with it is you borrow a bond to pay for them. But I think if you have the money and you know about them, when we have the opportunity, we try to put a reasonable amount in there. You know, I'm not suggesting we put in 10 million. I think as long as, when we have an opportunity to always have some money in there so that as things come up, we can.
Spread it out, right?
Correct.
We got hit with a 10 million, it's our choice how we might spread
Correct.
it out.
Yeah, so I'm not suggesting, I would never suggest that, you know, that we should be like, our goal should be to fully fund that liability. I think, you know, it's good though to have a certain amount in there because as there's sometimes smaller ones come up every so often, the board will approve one at $40,000, $50,000. You know, instead of issuing bonds or debt or going to your operating budget, having that money available to pay those, I think is important to have a certain amount there.
As always, thank you, Maureen.
You're welcome.
Can I ask a quick follow-up? Why would the town of Greenberg prefer those units to remain commercial? Because if I'm not mistaken, when a commercial entity grieves the taxes,
Could I jump in, Alex?
Sure.
I don't know if it's even Greenberg or if it's a state one.
No, it was the town of Greenberg made that decision on the revow.
There's a it's a difficult issue. It's a.
My understanding, I mean, part of it, I'm sorry, so I think it's hard when you already have existing people living in those, because to do that would really devalue a lot of those properties pretty quickly, because their taxes would go up significantly,
okay,
and a lot
gotcha.
of their value that they're getting is tied to the taxes, right? Because that's how most people look at it, right, the both. So my understanding, and it wasn't just a Hastings thing, I think the town, in fairness, had to look at very broadly the entire town. And I think in some places where they may have even had more of that type of housing that existed, it would have been a big, like, I mean, as big of a shift, a lot of people had their homes revalued, and we understand that too, but I think the shift to do those properties.
Understood.
So I think there was some discussion about doing it for new developments, which I think was a fairer way to do it, because then at least people then, because really the people who make it the most are the developers, so if they kind of
At the
understood that, then when people were buying them, at least they probably would not be able to, you know, sell them for as much, because the way those would be taxed in the future would be different, right? So
So-
that's kind of my understanding, that's the talk to change it going forward, not going back.
so the top, that would be, so just for example, we're talking about like the new units planned for Hastings. Those would operate under the same tax regime as Clairwood? Is that the expectation?
I believe so, but that one, I honestly do have, because when they made that decision, which they had to make a decision one way or the other when they were doing the reeval, and they also looked at other communities that had done it. I don't want to, like, I don't think they made that decision lightly, but I think, you know, that was where they ended up with it. But I know at that time, there was some discussion about doing it for new, I have to see if that's where they ended up for sure, because since that decision was made, we haven't had anything new for us, so I would almost have to check that to know, and I'm sure the village may also they may be aware of that, where they ended up with that, meaning for new developments.
Because just with regards to tax cert for commercial spaces, those taxes, when they're grieved, unlike a residential property, so to speak, you can go back, am I right? It's 3 times the amount that can be assigned as a penalty. You
You
can go
mean,
back in previous years and it's sort of.
well, they have to file, if you don't file, the difference is when it's an individual homeowner grieves their taxes, it gets settled within like a 12-month cycle. It has to. It doesn't go beyond that. When those actually, they do have to file, if you do not file every year, you can't go back like, oh, I forgot to do it, I want to go back. You're not allowed to do that. So there's times they miss a filing date because there's people they file on us and then there's like a year they don't, but they're not allowed to go back and say, well, I did it, the year before. So, but I think that, we're hoping that reeval eventually, the hope supposedly by doing that would also help us with some of these tax certs. We have not seen that as of yet, like where that's, the idea is that places that reevaluate, but if they were able to do the non-homestead piece, that helps kind of make things like, that they're less of a possibility of tax, certs.
Of course, right.
But I think I think there's some, like even with the A&P, like when they were out of business, like we still have that one as an open because they, it was there, but they weren't getting rental. Yeah, I mean, they weren't operating, so we know we have a couple that are like a little bit bigger dollars that we're anticipating, will be settling. But I don't know who will be settling, because I think A&P went completely bankrupt, but somebody's still, that liability's still out there with the courts, so.
Maureen, I just want to say thank you for the thorough work with your team. I mean, this was an auditor who just thanked you for what you've done, and I just want us to recognize that, because that is, my mom is an accountant. That is really a good reflection of what your team is doing, so I just want to say that out. Thank you.
They are, it's really the entire, the group, and it is a lot of work, and not saying for myself, I'm saying it more for the people in my own office now, because it's like, that's our, everyone's like, oh, the summer's great, we're like, that's our April 15th, and it's a very short time frame because they actually really come in like August 1st, so it's like you have to close, all your financials, so. But everyone's, not only Hastings, everyone's in that same boat, so, I credit to them, because, they know not even to take a day off during that time, so.
Thank you.
They're great,
Good job.
thanks.
Thanks.
Great work, Maureen and team. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll move on to announcements. I guess I'll just make these and pass it over to you, Dr. McCursey. PSATs, grade 11 only, Wednesday, October 13. ENL K to 12 back to school night, October 13 also, 6 to 7. Homecoming, Saturday, October 16th. I don't have any other further details, but
Go Hastings.
hopefully it'll be a good time. High school picture retakes, Friday, October 22nd. Okay, so I'm going to pass it over to you, Dr. McCursey, for a report from the superintendent.
Okay, and then board member photo retakes, one of those.
Mask up.
Glad you are opening with humor here, Dr. McCursey. So COVID-19 update we had built into this agenda, and today almost felt like you don't need one, which I guess is good news, but let me share some statistics. Compliment to the medical advisors here, who I agreed, even though you know who they are, would not name them by name. But they're great partners, and late Friday, they reached out to me, as they did all the Quad Village supers, to ask us to begin thinking a little bit differently around the required test for students, because there is a testing shortage going on, which is a challenge. And so they're working with the county on some different options, but I just want the board to know that the students here in particular are getting a lot of care from a variety of directions. So I raise that as an example. But in the email that I received Friday evening from medical advisors, it sort of echoed what George Latimer, as the Westchester County Executive, shares with the supers not this week because of Indigenous Peoples' Day and Columbus Day, we do not meet. But the numbers are very, very good right now in Westchester County. And so these are what I heard Friday evening, that the September daily cases were about 200 per day. They're now down to 100 per day on a 7-day average. So that's, you can do the math. That's a 100% drop. The positivity rate has gone from 3% down to just a bit over 1%. And for any of us who've been around COVID-19, we used to track those numbers all the time. I've not done that here. I may, in the Friday note, put those sort of numbers out just to give context. Vaccination rates in this county are very high. Over 80% of all eligible individuals are fully vaccinated. For elderly, as you'd hope, it's up over 85%. But age eligible to be over 80% is remarkable in a county such as this, which
Wow.
is a remarkably diverse, far-reaching county, as you all know. And surveillance testing across the districts that our medical advisors know well is producing almost no positives, and I think so far we're at 0 positive from the surveillance testing. So that's very, very strong. In past district time, fancy charts every day, tracking both the numbers of positive confirmed and the quarantines. The numbers are so low that I've not ventured into that here, but I did my own little number where a total of 4 students so far confirmed positive this year, which has resulted in 12 quarantines. So nobody wants any of that, but that's, again, I don't want to jinx us, but that's a very small number. Staff positives are at a total of 4, with 2 of those before school started, and no quarantines. So that's an effect there of the vaccinations. And so you saw, as a community and a board, we did have 1 positive high school today, which led to only 1 quarantine. And that's due to the vaccinations. You know, when you have 2 students, Hillside, that led to 6 quarantines, and there's obviously a vaccination issue there. But we're also drawing those lines very tightly as to who needs to quarantine. And that literally was the lunch table around that particular student. Because as the county's advised us, and we have people probing that, whether you're indoor or outdoor and the mask is off, sitting for that sustained time, you need to quarantine. And there's some who are concerned about the indoor-outdoor on that, meaning we thought we had more flexibility outdoor, but we do have to work with the county on that. So having thought there'd be nothing to say about COVID-19, I just gave you an update. And let me say one other thing. We all sit here in our masks, and as I've said before, one of the wonderful things about being an interim super in this district is I'm right in the middle of it, so I can see what's going on, and our young people are wearing the masks, and that's a critical line of defense for us still, and they're doing a great job with that, and I think the numbers bear that out. And I should say we're seeing no evidence of transmission from within, and that's what our medical advisors and others are saying around us.
Bill, I just want to add that the janitors, like anytime I'm here, the rate at which they are cleaning is really important, and that I think is really helping with them getting rid of any infection, and they are always on the move, and I think it's good to recognize that.
Yeah. And that's something that's been here, thanks again to Maureen and the board and Valerie, your previous superintendent, to guide you to that point, because I noticed right away that you are extra clean here in that regard, compared to some other places I know well. And you made some investments that others haven't, which I think that's important. I can go now if you want the district highlights. Are there questions about the COVID topic, or?
Bill, can you just remind me
Please.
how many days of quarantine is?
It's per the county, and actually it's the cascade, if you will, from CDC to the New York State, the
Right.
OH down to, the simple answer is 10.
10, thanks.
And that's, and there's, but 10 at this point. The district highlights, that's something we're putting in every meeting for you. 4 here, if others want to add beyond that, but a number of us this weekend were at one of the 2 productions of the complete works of Shakespeare Abridged. It was a wonderful show. As I said, it was a show for the older students in the crowd, but it was my first taste of the theatrical talents of Hastings, and to be this early in the year with such a production of such extent technically, the quality of the acting and the talent here was really breathtaking. And I think they warned people it would be for the older students, and it was, and that's fine. I think we should feel good about that. you know, I've been lucky to study a lot of Shakespeare, and, you know, he wrote at all levels, so. And very smart Hastings, both the students and the community rallies clearly here, and it was really a community event. And I did like the fact when it was starting to drizzle, the people at the snack table said, because of rain, it's only $1 for every snack. So when it stopped raining, I went back and I said, has the price gone up? And they said, no, it's still $1. So, but that was a real plus, and I did see a number of you there. Second is our fifth graders, if you've noticed, decorated the sidewalk outside. And that was positive messaging regarding National Bullying Prevention Month. So really an attempt to extend that message out. Third, as you probably saw in the community note that went out Friday from me, that the athletic teams have rallied quite thoroughly for their initiative called Compete to Beat Cancer. And it's really, I think, as far as I know, going across all the teams as a way to raise money and all the rest to fight cancer. And for some of the individuals involved, it's not just a larger issue, but a personal issue. And I think that's impressive. Homecoming weekend, as Doug mentioned, is coming up. I had lost track that our student reps would not be here, so I do need to expand a bit because I knew they would go there actively. But this Friday is high school pep rally day, 2 to 3. Most of us have that locked into our schedule. It may delay the community updates because that's typically when those get written, but I think you'll be patient for us to be out of pep rally. Saturday is a very active, and actually starting Friday, very active for the homecoming matches and games. They start Friday with boys soccer and then carry right through Friday, and then carry right through on Saturday with the home matches in games, including football, field hockey again, girls both JV and varsity. Then we've got cross-country in here, so it's really quite a full event, and volleyball. I should not leave out volleyball. So you just have to wear the right Hastings colors and make it a grand event. So those are the updates, I should say, district highlights. I don't know if there are any questions or I missed anything or anyone wants to add something.
Do you want to finish off the trifecta with communication plan and survey update?
Sure, and we have members of the communication work group here. This is a work in progress. I was quite pleased with the reactions of the community work group because there are really 3 pieces we're working on right now. One is a communication plan, which the full board will see soon. The work group has seen it, and if they want, they can comment on it. The plan right now focuses on really what I might call content strategic objective. The rest is mechanics. And the work group endorsed that. Right now is the time for Hastings to get the mechanics stronger on communication. And when you see the plan, I think the content objective will make sense to you. It's rather far-reaching and inclusive, but the mechanics are the key thing. The plan right now is on hold while second we get a survey out, and that I hope to have out this week. We piloted it with several members of the work group, very thorough comments back. I think we're bringing all of those in. Melissa is working with Jason on that. So some really good revisions will happen to the survey. We also piloted it with PSAT and SEPTA leaders, as well as some staff. And that kind of piloting is giving us good feedback on it. It's a basic survey. I think it goes after all the key issues right now from a mechanics standpoint that we want to figure out. It will, I think, send a statement out on its own that we're serious about improving communications. And we don't want staff nervous. We don't want them saying, my goodness, they're asking a question about this. That means they're going to demand more of us. No, it's not that at all. Did I say no? It's about just trying to be very efficient and high quality with our communications. And again, the plan's on hold, as you'd hope, until we get the survey data back to sort of finalize the plan. Last piece is we've been working on what we're calling a communication protocol in plain English. That is, who do you call when with a question. We have, with appropriate crediting, borrowed a system the Roslyn, New York schools have used now for about almost 15 years. And it literally lists, if you're a parent and you have a question on an academic, who do you call first? And then you can go through the medical, you can go through athletic, you can go through the arts. It just lists everywhere who you should call. We're modifying that now for Hastings standpoint, so actually Fee Goodman's taken a lead on that after the whole leadership team worked it over, and she and Jason and Chris Yerkes are working on a way to make it strong on the website. So I'll just say that, we'll see. But very important, we're weaving into it an idea the communications work group has had is to say, where on the website might you have a place that families, community can post their questions, their comments? And there was good advice from the work group not to do that separate from this protocol, because you might see everybody racing to the general, putting their questions in the general, and not then using the protocol we're creating. So what we're trying to work on, and we'll get back to you with what Jason and Chris Yerkes have designed, is to try and weave that general into the more specific guidance. So that's a lot of words there, but there are 3 products we're working on: a plan, a survey, and then this, what we're calling communication protocol. So I don't know if the work group wants to add anything, because you were actively looking at it earlier this week.
Yeah, I was certainly, and I'm actually very happy this has taken up, and I'm very honored to work with this board, because I feel like we are very practical in our approach and sort of centered, regardless of our differences, in what needs to be done to be very equitable and supportive of our students. I'm extremely very happy about this particular committee. Doreen and I have spoken. I think this will bring the transparency that a lot of the community members are seeking, which again, before some of us got here, we thought there was some fishiness going on, and then we realized all the different bureaucracy that we need to be subjected to. So I think that, I just hope the community is hearing this, but I know those that had reached out to me, I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid, I promise you, I'm not, but Bill, the leadership team are doing everything that we can possibly do to make sure that our promise is actually what we do, right? Doreen, you could add to it, but.
Exactly. No, I just want to say thank you, Dr. McPherson, because I think that the work you have done so far and really taking this seriously and looking at it from such a high point, but also a micro point, I'm so excited for what's going to come out of this. It's
Yeah.
really, it's amazing.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Good, good. Let me add one other update. We did push out in the Friday note the leadership team priorities, and some good coaching from members of the board to modify that a bit from what you'd seen earlier. But it was important to the principals especially, and the leadership team joined by Melissa, that we did get that out this week. We embedded it in the documents, people can go see it. But the big change, if you did get a chance to look at it, was that in each of the academic and SEL areas, we laid right at the top of each of those, not just, I thought, the attractive Venn diagram that put everything in one place, but then we said, okay, when you actually get to an item, here are the 2 or 3 action steps you can expect. So it's very clear. Thank you, Melissa, for getting that put together with that much more clarity. And again, I thought it was a nice moment of some good coaching from members of the board to say, this is good, you can get it better. And it's still a work in progress. And then I would stress that we did in that, at the end, we had the leadership team operational improvement areas, but we did list what the leadership team is doing together this year to build coordination and collaboration and better effectiveness as it relates to special education. Because our aim this year is to be really a team of 14 that's strong in that realm. So that is in that document, raised up since you last saw it. So that's all the reports and updates from me at this point.
Thank you. Okay, a report from Melissa. When are you officially a doctor?
Well, it's all done. Everything is done. The format review is done. The submission to the worldwide database is done. Everything is done. So it's literally a matter of paperwork, so I'm expecting it in January. So that's when you'll see a quiet change.
On board.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's been a labor
It
of love.
shouldn't be
you
quiet,
know?
it should be loud. It should be loud and proud.
Exactly, right? It's a lot of work.
It's been great learning, really, really good learning. And I've been extremely fortunate to participate in a program, in a doctoral program that has pushed me deeper into my own work rather than pulling me out and
correct.
shifting focus. So it's been really wonderful.
Great.
Congratulations.
Thank you. yeah.
Congratulations.
And you've been working at the doctor level, honestly, since you entered our district. Whether or not that was reflected in the degree that you held, spot on from day one, Melissa. So.
No, it's been a pleasure.
Okay, well, I'll pass it on to you, Ms. Samansky.
Lots of good things going on. So I wanted to highlight that we are in the process of preparing for our tri-state visit, and that is going to be a long journey. It's March 9th through the 11th. And so there have been layers of this. So I mentioned to you before that it's been a collaborative focus that's been done together with the Chair Council, which includes leadership and teacher leaders. And then recently, the next layer, Lou Adepietro, Jennifer Spirelli, Amy Kazis, Tusva Stewart, and I attended a visit preparation that was hosted by Tri-State. So regional professionals came, and our team went as well. And we learned together about the necessary action steps that really go into a very strong visit, where we ask about an area of inquiry where we can receive some guidance from our critical friends. And this includes finalizing the focus of the visit, forming an internal steering committee for the visit, determining our essential questions, reviewing indicators. So Tri-States has different indicators and levels of success, so to speak, but they benchmark you. They help you figure out where you are along your journey. Establishing a timeline for preparation, preparing all of the necessary logistics to host our visitor friends from throughout the region, and designing a district presentation which frames the essential questions that we develop. So our intention is to finalize our essential questions that are going to be grounding our visit immediately following our October Chair Council meeting. In between all of that, so following the Tri-State Preparing for a Visit workshop, Bill and I also had some discussions with the Tri-State executives. So Marty Brooks is the executive director there, and Lauren Allen was also there. So we've had some conversations there to help with our preparations and our framing of the visit. So we'll circle back around to them again. Diagnostic screening, so social emotional learning. Jeanette Coker, Director of School Counseling, and I have been working with our internal technology staff, our data coordinator, and a consultant from Panorama Education to prepare for rostering students for the social emotional learning screener, and also to explore implementation resources to get into teachers' hands. And that includes a guide to activating accommodations for students, such as text-to-speech. I also developed a rubric. There's one survey that is given to students by teachers. We wanted to make sure that as teachers are administering those questions to the littlest learners, that there's alignment in how they're looking at those. We're waiting for Panorama just to sign off on some paperwork, and then we can move forward with our rostering. We are anticipating that we're on our timeline to administer at the end of October. But again, we are actually waiting on them, so we're ready to rock on our end. And we're in good shape. Our diagnostic screening for the academic learning for our students has already concluded that first screening period, so that was exciting. We've gotten some really positive feedback there. We've been moving into our internal data analysis. And again, this is a brand new screener for us. So we are, as adult learners in this process, getting to know the tool, getting to know its capabilities, and really honing our own analytical skills. It gives you tons and tons and tons of reports. So we're trying to drill down on what's going to be most meaningful to be able to support students as we're looking at patterns. So We did our first data dive at the end of last week, and that was the building administration and myself, so we were the first layer. We also have some training on data analysis that's coming up. So the first level will actually be on the 18th, and that'll be our MTSS teams and building administration. Then on the 19th, the middle school teachers. Then on the 21st, the elementary school teachers. So they'll be cycling through different reports, taking a look at some patterns within their own students, within their own classrooms, and across their grade levels. And then, just to make mention, just with the SEL screener as well, the data from the academic screening process is going to be used as one data point of information. It is not the be-all, end-all. It is a wonderful data point to have. It gives us some guidance on direct next steps for instruction. And that includes extensions as well. And then if there are enrichment opportunities that are necessary, as I was mentioning, and as applicable, any referrals that might be necessary to the building level MTSS, multi-tiered system of supports team, if we think additional intervention might be needed. So once the internal analysis process has been completed, then we're going to be sharing the score reports with parents so that there's transparency around that. And again, we're all learning this together, right? So this is our first time with this particular screener. And so far, kudos to our diagnostic screening team that helped select this one, because there's been a really positive response, and the information that we're receiving is quite helpful. K-12 Mathematics Committee, so we've begun meeting again. We had our big reunion for the fall, so that was wonderful, and it was in person, which was even more exciting. So the focused areas for our first session included setting the purpose for the group, the work of the group over the current school year. And it also meant continuing with the rubric development that we began in spring 2021. So that was a pretty robust process. So we've begun that already. So we've committed as a team to finalizing that rubric, which we'll be sharing out more broadly with our internal teachers for use, creating shared definitions for anything within the rubric that might be potentially ambiguous or interpreted in multiple ways, so that we're all clear on the language that we're using and why. And also designing job-embedded learning opportunities for members of the mathematics faculty. So that means that we'll be looking at units of study. We'll be doing some lesson study together. That will involve teachers designing, analyzing, and refining lessons together, and that will be key to the embedded work that's then brought to life in the classrooms. Alongside all of that, I'll make mention is the big ideas work that's happening in the middle school. So that group, some members of that group are also on the K-12 Mathematics Committee. There's some cross-pollination going on there. And as well, the middle school mathematics team is meeting on a regular basis. So they've started implementing. And we are having monthly opportunities that we can not only refine our understanding of the resources, but make sure that we're looking at student work and that our practice is being informed by the rubric that's being created by the mathematics committee. So all of that is fitting together. I want to echo what Bill said. Congratulations to the high school cast and crew of the complete works of William Shakespeare Abridged. It was really wonderful, the talent and the collaboration of the students, and they really shone through. Even though we had some raindrops, they danced around those, and everyone was in great spirits. I want to publicly recognize and thank Gerard Marciano, Rachel Weinberg, and Gillian Husofsky for all of their efforts to direct and produce this show. So thank you. Amazing talent in this district. So, questions?
Yes, I do have a couple of direct questions, but I'm not sure you may be able to address all of it, and it's totally fine. But in terms of the SEL, I was just wondering if there is a way, I was just thinking, and it may not be possible, to sort of see what the alumni may input from the alumni as well. I know that when we had the community event where we invited experts, neurobiologists and clinical psychologists to speak. I think you attended one of that event on the social emotional learning aspect that impacts middle schoolers in their metacognitive states. Like, it's really it's heightened there, which sort of impacts them in the academic work. There were a lot of, of course, we cannot talk to I'm looking for the correct word, but you're aware, you know this, but in terms of the theory of instruction, which has to be prescriptive, I feel like having that information from the alumni, because they spoke, I think some of the board members were there when they spoke about wanting to be able to learn about themselves, wanting to be able to see the Cinderellas that are also dark-skinned, right? Those little things that otherwise we think is really nothing. I'm not sure whether that kind of input can help shape not the theory of learning, which is the work of but that you can delve into how it changes from class to class, right, and student to student. But just that instruction piece to serve as the prescriptive form when you and Bill and the leadership, you are the curriculum director, are shaping it. I think that may be helpful because they are out of the school system and they were able to freely talk their hearts out without having to feel they needed to filter or be careful, right? Because some of it is because sometimes parents may also, it's just difficult when you're in for you to be authentic in what you want to say. So that's just my thought.
You're making me think about how Yakira Samath, who's an alumni, she took a gap year and she was working in partnership with Hastings Rise as their youth engagement liaison. This is what this is making me think about. And, Bill's going to have, the scheduled meeting presentations coming up. And, Janice and I worked really closely to really understand what her research was about. And it was about, race and ethnicity and the lived social experience. And so while her study was sort of proprietary, so to speak, we did have an executive summary. So I feel like it might be a good idea to bring that in as we're talking about one of the presentations. I'd like to think a little bit more about that together with Bill, together with Janice. But your point is well taken. So when we're thinking about different experiences and, students who may have even already graduated at this point, like what that might look like. We did make the decision to make sure that I mentioned the technical piece around the rostering and preparing all of that. What we want to do is be able to disaggregate it by groups of students. So that's a little different than what you're talking about because you're talking about potential alumni experiences. But I do think there's a place where we can dig a little bit more deeply there, as long as we're asking questions and, we're looking at different groups and we're looking at patterns that are coming to light too. It's a good point. I want to think a little bit more about it.
One last thing that I'll add to this is, this is not rocket science. This is common knowledge, but we all know what COVID brought us, right? And we all saw how different experts seem to be giving conflict with information, but it wasn't really, because this is the case where we had virologists that were looking at the virus, and we had medical doctors that were looking at the symptoms that is creating in an individual that could potentially kill that individual, which differed from person to person. So they were focusing on how to make sure your blood doesn't clot, so take this, or you don't get this, so take that, right? And people were crossing it with that's the cure. And the virologist is like that's not the cure, because we are looking at how to get rid of the virus. So without that back, the perfect scenario is to get physician scientists who are PhDs and MDs for them to give that information. That being said, I'm using this as an example because that's a common knowledge that we all share. I'm using this as an example to ask that in the process of creating these professional development processes, it may be useful that apart from getting these experts that are more in the education piece of it, to also just invite those that are just strictly clinical psychologists or strictly neurobiologists, like, because sometimes you don't have one person who has it all, right? But just as instructors listen to the different information, they will be able to, out of their own experiences, curate the information that would help them do what they are doing. So I think that some of these professional development measures is not, you may not get that one person, but just selecting those different experts who are focusing on various aspects related to the work can. And again, I know remember we had something similar that we organized, and they were two separate experts speaking on the same thing. One was a clinical psychologist, one was a neurobiologist, behavior, and it was such a beautiful information that went on and on. Like, I had to say, it's time. Can I stop? Like, it was getting to 10, and these speakers were there because, so I think it would be helpful if you think about, during the professional development piece, after it's all said and done, to sort of support the teachers and stuff like that. That may be helpful to consider.
We also have a lot of internal expertise with people working in different domains, right? And I think that's come through as really important feedback as well. And it's similar to what you're describing. So having a member of the MTSS team who is a school psychologist alongside someone who's a teacher when that data is being analyzed is really important.
Thank you.
It's a really good point. We have so many experts right here.
And they would
There's
do it
value
for
to
free.
both,
Right.
right? There's the internal lived expertise. I feel like there are things that people learn from their experiences of just living in the classroom, and also having mentors and things that you wouldn't necessarily be able to easily articulate in a book, right? And there are articles and texts, and then there are external experts, and there's value to all of that different type of learning, so.
It's great, Melissa. I just have one question, Melissa. I don't know if you know the answer to this. When is New York State going to release the data from the testing from
It's a
this
very
spring?
timely question. I just got an email today. They were anticipating releasing it at the end of September. I just got an update now that the state delayed that, and now they're looking at October. So there's access to certain professionals where they can see things now, but that complicates things, because here we are in a place where we want to be transparent. We want to make sure that we're sharing everything out, and balancing that with making sure students are getting supports now and not waiting. So it's been a little bit tricky. So I really actually appreciate that question. It's well timed. The reports, the state test reports are being sent out by the Lower Hudson Regional Information Center directly to families, which is a shift. It used to come through the district. It's coming through BOCES. They're actually doing the mailing. The NYSESLAT data for our English language learners actually did come out already, but other things are sort of on hold. So there's a little bit of ambiguity about the when we anticipated it already.
So does the
thanks for
state
asking.
deliver it directly? Like, will I get my kids directly to me, for instance, or do they deliver it to, like,
It
Jennifer, and then she disperses it?
Yeah, so in this case, it's neither this year. So it goes to a database, a portal, essentially. And so there are educational portals that we have access to, different layers of access. I would have more access, for example, than a building assistant principal might have. But there are dives that we do, like data dives, where you have access. And then the region that sort of is the keeper of the portal regionally, because there's also the state database, but they then do the pull of the parent reports, and they will be sending it out on the district's behalf. So it's a long way of me saying, we thought it would be already, and I just today got an email saying that there's some ambiguity and that they've decided that not yet. I will say that the state tests that were administered specifically in grades 3 through 8, which are the biggies that everyone has eyes on, were not as typical as in years past. So, when I do that presentation coming in November, I'll frame that a little bit more specifically about why the differences.
I mean, the actual test was different?
Yeah.
Like the questions
test-
were different than they normally
It was
are?
just a different type of experience, and I do believe, and I'm speculating, but I do believe that it could be partly because the state was trying to apply for a waiver to administer the testing from the federal government, and there was a delay in deciding whether or not the states would have to administer the state test or not, and ultimately the state needed to, so then there was a hurry up and let's get this moving. So there were pieces. So I'll frame that a little more specifically. I'm sorry I don't have an exact answer yet, but we just don't know.
Maybe at the next meeting.
I hope so.
We'll see.
That's my hope.
Just jumping in on that, and of course, I could be wrong, but, yeah, this year's look at the tests is going to be very different for parents, for our teachers. Specifically, the tests that I saw with my kids and my students, they were already released questions. The whole test. So it's really a year to take a pause and wait for next year to see how we're doing. But Melissa knows way more than I do about this, and we'll look forward to it in the future. But this is not a year to really compare our growth to anything. And I know we're focusing a lot on social emotional, and we're focusing a lot on academics, and we have big goals in this district. But testing is going to be a very strange comparison for the next 2 years.
Yeah, and the federal government, ESSA, basically the Every Student Succeeds Act, they even suspended, the counting the data. Things were
Correct.
kind of on hold. So that we administered the state test, everyone complied. And again, just like everything else, it's a data point. I truly appreciated having that academic screener administration that is more internal, and it's adaptive, and so it adjusted for students to be able to pinpoint where their next learning moves would be. So we'll get more into that more deeply soon, but yeah.
The academic screener is really interesting, so you can look at it from an individual child, but also as like a 5th grade.
That's right. That's right.
It's great.
And I do love that because it shows us, are there some areas to look at, in terms of strengths and vulnerabilities of questions it raises, like, even programmatically, it just makes you have more wonderings, which I appreciate.
If I can add one thing, also, we talked about with, the importance of having granular data. There were a lot of studies done on a variety of interventions, and, for in math and English, and they had trouble generating statistically significant differences. But when, in aggregate, I think you said that when you went in, when you dived in and looked at the effect on individual kids, there were, highly significant differences. So I think it's, I was glad to see that survey lets you get granular, because it's kind of, that's the level where change actually happens. So it's hard to make a change broadly that affects everybody beneficially. So, I think it's good to do it that way.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. Maureen?
I'll go pretty quick here. I'm just kind of, one of the things I don't have listed here, but just to kind of give just an update on our capital project work, everything is still on schedule, on budget. Like, I just don't hold my breath every day. I hold my breath about that second one is actually makes me more nervous. But so far, so good. And the last of our projects is now well underway, which is the middle school auditorium, and I can tell you from the noise I'm hearing, it is underway all day. So, no, but that's good. So that, all good things. Hillside, they're closing the building envelope. Most of the work now, over the next few months, is going to be the internal, construction of the building. They've gotten a lot of the framing done. I mean, those are big milestones. So we're still targeted for that, end of February, beginning of March, and again, date to kind of get that space opened up. And we're excited for that. And the middle school, the music suite down the hall here, it really looks wonderful. There's a couple things, a couple lead time items, but we do believe we'll reopen that space in November 1 is our goal, but there may be like some cabinetry that may be installed at a later date, but, we can release that space to them. So it would be nice for it to be all together, but, we think they're using the Farragut gym, so I'm sure they'll prefer to go back in there even without the cabinetry. I just wanted to touch on safety for the community to kind of let people who may not be aware that the district participates in a partnership. It's a PTSA-led committee, but it does include myself and Joe DeMonterana when needed, the police chief, fire, trustee Lopez, Mary Beth, who is the village manager. And it's really been, although sometimes I feel like we've been talking about a lot of these things for many years, we have started to make some headway in trying to find ways to make the way to school for our students and around the school safer. One of the things we've been speaking about for the last few years was the need to increase some of the crossing guards around the building. As you know, the village has one at Hillside and one down crossing guard, but we have multiple crosswalks, many of which have students or, sometimes they're not aware of how to correctly enter the crosswalk, and some of it is the drivers, right? So one of the things you'll be seeing, hopefully by the end of this week, is that we are partnering with the village, and we are, in fact, using some of our staff, but being trained by the village to man the crosswalks. So that's actually exciting for me because we've been talking about it for 5 years, but I think anyone who has children and has dropped around this complex in the morning could appreciate, the significance of that. So we'll be doing that, and there are some other things we're kind of looking into, such as drop-off zones and designated bus drop-offs for both, particularly at the Farragut complex for some of the sporting buses. So it's good things, and again, we appreciate the partnership with the village in helping us get some of these things moved ahead. Transportation, just a quick update. It's getting better. There are still different people or different children that we're waiting to improve or find a better route for them. Most of our special education children now, pretty much, I believe, just in case there's one person that may not think it's ideal yet, we've addressed all the ones that I'm aware of, and they seem to be working well, at least starting late last week. We do have some of our private school students, because of the lack of bus drivers, we're still combining many of the routes, and some of the routes are, for schools that are 20 minutes away, like an hour and 40 minutes to get there. So they're getting there, but the times, certainly we want to try to improve some of those. But the good thing is too, we are seeing we've extended some routes, and some of them, although they're a little bit longer, they're working well and they're more efficient, like financially, so we may keep some of those in play. But we'll continue to work through that, and, hopefully in the next month or so, all the major issues will be addressed. One of the things that makes me get very nervous is we have no backup drivers right now because all of the drivers that we do have. So, that's another big challenge that I'm hoping that we'll have more drivers on board before somebody needs to be out for one day, because that's makes me a little nervous. And then finally, we'll be beginning our budget process in the next few weeks. It kind of starts as a distributive model. We send out to the buildings their enrollments and some of the known things that per pupil allocations and things that were given from the state, and we begin starting that process, people building what they think they're going to be needing, or in conjunction with Bill and Melissa, meets with people in the special ed, and it takes quite some time. I mean, it is a 12-month process. It really never ends. This is the official beginning of it, but we all certainly talk a lot about it in all of our meetings and things that we know we're going to be needing for next year. Some early things that we found out, the good news is the retirement system payments that we make on behalf of our employees, we've already been told by the state that the percentage that we will have to pay for those, because they performed well the last few years, will drop. So that's also positive, because that has not, most years we're starting where that expense is going up. So, going into a budget and knowing some of our costs will be less is always a positive. So we'll be talking a lot about budget in the coming months. That's it. You're welcome.
Student report, I think, Melissa, is that something you have to read? Or-
Yeah, I can read it, you had submitted it.
Okay.
Okay, she said, good evening, everyone, Russ and I are both unavailable to do our report in person tonight, but we have the report ready nonetheless. We hope everyone watching tonight has a fun homecoming week. Speaking of homecoming, today was the first day of Spirit Week, and many students fashioned their best pajamas for Pajama Day. We are excited to see who goes all out for Twin Day, Jersey Day, and Green and Gold Day the rest of the week. High school students will all attend this year's pep rally at 2 p.m. on Friday afternoon. It will take place at Reynolds Field instead of the Cochran Gym at its usual location. Senior MCs Ella Campbell and Wyatt Leckie have many fun activities planned to get everyone hyped for all upcoming homecoming festivities. The student union has also created a competition between the sports teams. The team that hangs up the most posters around the school before Friday's pep rally will win a prize. Now for the homecoming games, boys soccer kicks off the weekend on Friday with a 4:30 p.m. game. Rival Dobbs Ferry. The rest of the games are on Saturday. Field hockey at 10 a.m., girls soccer at 11 a.m., and finally football at 1:30 p.m. Many student clubs and organizations will have booths at the football game. Pep bands will also be playing for the first time in 2 years. Girls soccer had an exciting Under the Lights game on Friday that resulted in a 6-0 win over Dobbs Ferry. Even though it was Dobbs' homecoming and senior game, many Hastings fans showed up and made their presence known. The energy was amazing, and many players and fans agreed that night games, especially on Friday nights, would be a great way to bring the student body and community together in the future. Girls soccer's record advanced to 8-3 with the win. Project Shares Thanksgiving will be held in the Cochran Gym this year due to COVID restrictions. But the student board is hard at work planning a dinner on wheels that as many students as possible will be able to take part in. Juniors are taking the PSAT tomorrow morning, which means stress levels are high. Football also had an exciting home win on Saturday against Rhinebeck.
Could I just say one thing? It's so funny because during my report, I was going to say we should consider bringing back the lights for homecoming. I actually had a note here because that is something a lot of people were talking about both at Ardsley and Dobbs Ferry, and historically, and I don't know, Jeremy knows, there was a time even when my kids were still in school, that there was lights around homecoming that were rented. And there is something about doing that. In most schools, like Dobbs has the lights, but other schools rent them. And it is something that, allows you to kind of do more activities the week of homecoming. So I just heard a lot of feedback from people who attended Ardsley, and I was like, we should do that, or consider in conjunction with the Booster Club, considering bringing that back, because it does typically mean you get more people.
Cell phone.
Yes, well, a flashlight. We're just
We'll
gonna
bring
do-
lighters. Well, I'll bring lighters.
I would second that.
Lighter.
And
just wave.
Yeah.
I've heard the same thing from people that are, particularly on homecoming, it would be really, really welcome. So it's something to think about.
That's great, thank you.
If I may, Doug, let me just say on the project shares, I don't want that to slide by because, and Melissa, you can fill in on who we met with, but we did look at that very, very carefully, and that's an amazing signature, as you all know better than I do. But I came to get to know it about a week or so ago with the founders. And some of you know I have a pretty deep background in philanthropy in the Midwest, and I brought that to bear in the conversation because we did take a moment, I guess I did, to go check to see was it all possible to have project shares as we know it, and we just can't. It's, 800-plus people eating, obviously masks off in a confined space is just not anything we can do right now. But it was a really moving moment, and I wrote to, and Melissa fill in the blank. Thank you. I'm a bit name challenged even to figure.
What they've been able to do is just absolutely incredible. And, we're all, we're all feeling that optimistic that in the near future, we hope to be able to revive that. It's a very, for those of you who have been able to see it in action, it's so special. It really is. So it's heartening to know that the students are pivoting and they're moving to a Meals on Wheels to make sure that that's, the energy of that stays.
And a
But-
nice signature to it. I thought about updating you Friday on that, then I thought about tonight, and so I think it's much more powerful. The students have raised up how important it is than me saying something about it. But it was, they took very well the decision that we couldn't do it, they understood. But the midnight runs, which I think is what's referred to there, are still continuing. And it's just a incredible signature moment for you as a community.
And I know that in the youth council, Elizabeth, you know Elizabeth, right? Yeah. She's actually trying to get the midnight run going because she was doing it and then COVID and then there was a pause, but I'm not sure if there's something that they can work with the school because the youth council, the midnight run is something that she wants to do, so probably I'll connect her. You could connect to her directly because she's in charge of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was actually the minute run, we used to do it on Sunday morning.
Correct.
But it is like, it's because they operate out of Dock Starter, so that's a good event.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they got married there, Jeannie and her husband got married in Project Share.
Oh,
Yeah, they did.
oh, that's wonderful.
A couple of years ago. Was it the first year you were here?
No, it was before I
Okay.
came, but I was able to attend the last one that ran, actually. Andrea Stewart Cousins came. It was a very big deal that they had a whole mariachi band, and it's very, very special, this feeling of community and just caring for each other and making sure that people are not forgotten, especially at a time of great gratitude. So it was lovely. So we all hope to be able to bring that back once, COVID settles down.
Thank you. Thank you for the student report, Melissa, and those extra comments regarding Project Share. Public comment. Do we have anyone in the public who would like to make a comment? Please keep to 3 minutes and state your name and whether you're a resident of Hastings. Okay. Going once, going twice, and second public comment comes later. Okay, we did the audit report on the business item 7A. Does anybody have any questions about any business items under 7A?
I think I just wanted to acknowledge item number 10, which to give thanks to the Hastings High School Alumni Association for the lovely print that it seems that they're gifting to the district. And so what an honor it is to be able to have one of Hastings' most renowned artists featured in our facilities. So I thought that that was terrific, and that should be singled out for being noteworthy and to extend our appreciation.
So nice of them. It'll look nice in your office, Bill. Just kidding.
We'll make it highly visible.
I know, I'm just joking.
Do you have a motion to approve items 1 through 16C? A second?
Second.
All in favor? Okay. 7B, do I have a motion to approve placements for services for CSE and CPSE? A second? All in favor? Okay, any questions or comments regarding personnel A through D? Do I have a motion to approve appointments, amendments, resignations, and leaves of absence under A through D?
So moved.
And a second? All in favor? Minutes, any questions about minutes from the September 27th meeting? A motion to approve the minutes from the September 27th meeting? Second? All in favor? Okay. The meeting topics, is this just to keep us updated, or is there some specific, Bill, that you wanted to?
Yeah, I can be brief. We had pointed at this meeting as a way, this will be a working document, a living document, it'll change. So I think this was a meeting, though, to make sure you as a board had a chance to add anything or modify anything. There is an update on a couple things I'll be very quick about, and I know we had a good question about one of the items that came in this afternoon. Just so you know, first off, in the November to December cycle for you, a couple weeks ago, we'd flagged there was a lot there. Well, the team that would bring you a lot has committed to bringing you a lot, and they think the sequencing is fine. Notice all those highly technical terms I just used, a lot. But to be very specific, Melissa and team feel that certainly on the 22nd, they can provide you both the update on SEL, which was referred to earlier with Jeanette Coker, will be very important to that. The learning impact of COVID-19, and we said impact, not loss there, but that will be a time to speak to some of the assessment questions were coming up earlier. But the feeling is that both of those we can bring to you that evening. We will go lighter on all the other things, so you won't get as much, if anything else, from Melissa certainly, but maybe even Maureen or myself will back way down on what we've been sharing, just so there's time for one or two pretty significant reports. And then on the 6th, that very next meeting, you'll have a DEI update, which will also be very important. And that's, I've, as a person managing what you see, I try and spread reports out for you. So the 22nd has a lot, and the 6th has a lot, but we think we can make that work, and putting them at different times wasn't going to flow as well for you. Let me jump all the way to May 23rd, and we've added this. It's the Class of 2022 Future Steps, and there was a good question about what that is, and the wording on that is maybe not final, but it's intentional. So-called draft intentional, which is, this is for you as a board in late May to hear from Jeanette particularly as to the class of 22, what do we know about where they're headed? And we're not calling it college matriculation. Yes, this is largely a college preparatory town, but we have other students doing other things. So it's, what are those future steps? That Jeanette feels is a good time to bring you that update. We're not going to sit here and say that Jane Doe is headed to X college. That's inappropriate and not right, so we're not going to do that. But more, what are the themes, what are the trends for students who may be making a different decision after this year? Thematically, where are they going? But this is something you may say, okay, that's really helpful to get at that time of year, or not. But that is an addition. Some districts wait until the fall to do that, but Jeanette felt there'd be enough information to give you an update then. Obviously, students make different decisions after May, but most of it is understood. So we felt it was a good way for you as a board to get one sense of a significant outcome here. So there may be questions, comments about what that is, but we have time to modify it and change it. But again, trying to have this be something that points you at a key topic in terms of where it's going to show up in the year. So I think those were the main. Melissa D., you're managing this so beautifully. Was there anything I left out here that I needed to flag? Okay.
Thank you, Bill, and Melissa, and everyone who's been keeping this up. I think this has, in years past, been kind of a document that's created and, lost in the shuffle of documents, doesn't really live as a live document, so the idea that you're really kind of fine-tuning it as we go, I think is helpful.
And there's one other fight. The proposed calendar, there have been questions about our calendar dates. Right now, meaning the setting of the future year calendar. So right now, that's on a March cycle for you. And good questions about could that come earlier? And this is be it Connecticut, New York State, here's a little different, but that timing of year matters. We have to pay attention to BOCES, not in Connecticut, but in New York State. And so the BOCES calendar becomes influential as to what we're doing. Also, I guess it's me now, Hastings sets just 1 year, some districts set 2 years out. I'm not asking you to do that or suggesting it, but you also tend to pay attention to the other districts, right? And so you're not gonna know the other districts. You don't really know BOCES, and you won't know the other districts till roughly in that March timeframe. But so if you as a board are able to vote by the end of March, I think families will have what they need to know, but again, this is something for you to talk about. But there have been questions about why in March could it be earlier, very good questions, but that's the reason why you have it on a March cycle. And very importantly, final comment, you see it, and a couple weeks later you vote on it, so that the community has plenty of time to react, make comments, give you feedback. I know in some districts, this is one of the most major decisions made, and I do have to say the following. There's a certain district where my daughters go to school that was in school yesterday, and they get reminded that some tall guy used to be the superintendent was the one who made the decision they would be in school on that Monday, and I politely say, no, the board decided as to who's in school on that Monday.
That's smart.
So, anyway, but any other questions or comments?
I have a comment, though. You had mentioned something about, sort of, like, the alumni kind of getting an idea of where everyone is, not specifically, but like more or less like the trend, right? Of where our graduates are going.
Future steps.
Yeah, future.
In the future,
Yeah,
correct, that worded. I'm just wondering, for our special education kids, I'm just wondering, we spoke a little bit about that last time, but I'm just wondering if there can be a way that we could sort of find time to revisit those cohort of students and find a way to practically harness and engage the work that is being done with them in a way that could be, the special education setting could be a little bit apart with the general education setting that we have. Hastings is doing a wonderful job, don't get me wrong, but I just feel like if we can, the same way we are taking on with different ways to understand and how to improve, I feel like it may be at some point we should find time to start a process that is really singled out at bringing in experts to see how we can better support those group of students in a way that will improve what is happening right now. I would just leave it there for now, yeah.
Okay. So I might separate that from the future steps. I hear you asking a really big and important question. And I think the leadership team, and you need to hear this, whole community needs to hear this. I think the leadership team, and it's based on my listening, has embraced the fact we are doing very good work for all our students, we're doing very good work for our special ed students. We have to do better. So please hear the building on the positive. And the phrasing I've been using is, and we've been using is, when we're strong for our special ed students, we're strong for everyone and vice versa. So I think there's a commitment to that, but I think you as a board should talk about how and when you may want updates and information on that. I would separate it out from that next steps, future steps.
Correct, thank you. That's
piece.
helpful.
But you need to grapple as a board when you want to look at that. But it is something that the leadership team's working on and together. So.
Thank you so much, Bill. Dr. McKenzie.
Second public comment.
Good night, Dorothy. Good night.
Thought we were so close to a comment. Okay, Board of Ed comments.
I just wanted to make a quick comment. You know, I was thinking about the document you shared with us, Dr. McCursey, about the goals of the leadership team and, you know, also questions that the board has generated. And so much of the feedback we've gotten from you and Dr. Smansky, can I say that?
It's allowable by the university. They said
Okay.
the minute you have a successful defense, you can
That's it,
technically
exactly.
start it, but it's technical once the diploma.
Okay, well, yeah, it sounds like I'm okay. And Ms. Carvalho, all the feedback that you continue to give us really hits on those points, and I appreciate so much your continuing in those rivers, in order to keep us updated. It really lets us feel like, okay, I see how this is progressing, and I know special ed is on that list of goals separately. I mean, even though it's so intertwined, it is on there, and I know that we'll be hearing about that as well. But thank you. The communication is moving along, and the feedback from the surveys and the social emotional. I mean, I just hear all those chains, and it's very exciting. So much appreciated, the organization and the efforts.
I just want to add that, thank you for the listening ear, because that had been very, like, that's all I would say. Like, thanks for the listening ear, because sometimes we were not unsure, or those that I had communicated with was more about, will it just be a nod and then bury their head like the ostrich right in the sun, like nothing is happening? And I am very appreciative of that when it comes to meetings with you, so thank you.
I can just bring up one question, just about the K-12 Mathematics Committee. I know it's a complex subject, but is there ongoing discussion about the course progression, or are there changes planned, things like that, you know?
That's begun, and so it's starting first amongst the leadership team, with full intention of bringing other voices in. So Dr. Stevens has been a key player in this, the middle school and the high school, because it really matters. It's a very complex, the course progression conversation is incredibly complex, because there's intersections with not only entry and exit points for students, but also thinking about transition. And so you may recall, you know, when Common Core came in, they just said, okay, everybody, here are your new standards, go. And they didn't even think about how to get people where they were. And we're acknowledging that right now, students who choose to accelerate at a certain point, we're saying, okay, there's a year's worth of content legitimately that they're skipping, which we try to build in elsewhere. So there's a curricular piece to that. There's a scheduling piece to that. There is a budgetary piece to that in terms of full-time employees to be able to make those pivots. You know, there are philosophical pieces to that about beliefs and values of when students should be accelerated and heterogeneity of classes versus when we start to kind of differentiate and track, and how we do that well. So that's my very long answer to say, yes, we've started, and we've had those meetings. We have another one coming up soon, actually. But a lot of preliminary work has to happen first, the administrative layers, before we can start then thinking about operationally what that can look like and who needs to be at the table for that.
Oh, that sounds great. I mean, because, you know, it's one of those things where when, you know, in California, I guess it was the San Francisco School District, that they'd done away with certain tracking. They sort of flattened it out. And when I first heard about it, I was like, oh, that sounds terrible. When you went to read about it and dove into the reasons why, some of the things you're touching on, which is one of the big things they're grappling with, is that there were entire cohorts of kids who weren't even ready for algebra at a young age. And so how do you manage, you know, it's really, there's no simple answer, and there's a lot of complexity involved. So I'm glad to hear that you guys are approaching it from, you know, that kind of, you know, multifactorial or complex angle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there,
Okay.
you know, some of the early conversations that we've been having also include, you know, when a student is either perceived or perceives themselves as stronger or weaker in mathematics, there are very different areas of mathematics. So you might be really strong in geometry and less strong in algebra, right? So also thinking about how do we help students to, you know, accelerate some of those areas where they're ready, or have additional support in the areas to develop more readiness. And so flexible pathways have been a really key part of our discussion right now, and thinking about, you know, not just the course progression itself, but how do we create the environment where the differentiation is happening to be able to have different entry points and exit points. So it's really complex, and we're in it. It's gonna take some time, because we are all committed to doing it well, and, you know, and doing our homework. We're looking regionally, we're looking at many pieces. I do think having a curricular resource, the big ideas, is very, very important for us. I think it gives us, you know, that resource was not an accidental selection. It was well vetted. And again, kudos to Dr. Stevens, who started those discussions before I even got here, so I won't claim credit for that. But once I did come and was part of leading this process, we did look under all the rocks to make sure, you know, and ultimately circle back to why this particular program, and does it align with the vision work that we've been doing. And they do have some accelerated curricular pathways. So right now, in 7th grade, for example, we have both the traditional 7th grade sequence as well as the accelerated pathway lessons in teachers' hands. So it's not that we just did the one. You know, we are really centering this notion of being able to meet the very different needs of our learners. So all of this plays in, and I feel very good that we do have a really strong resource where, as we're figuring out progressions, we have internal options right now that are able to meet the needs of our learners. So kudos to our team. Good stuff.
Melissa, do you ever hear back from, like, alumni, like, what they wish they were prepared for, like they were totally prepared and it was great?
I don't know, to be honest with you. I feel like, you know, I was so immersed in COVID reinvention the past year and a half, honestly, that I didn't even think to ask that. And it's a great question. It's something that I can just check with Jeanette on to see if she's ever gathered anything like that.
Just curious.
But, yeah.
I think it's going to, listening from our immediate alumni, I have heard so many things that actually are positive, that even will help persons of color in this community if they would just, you know, like, not the way that we are thinking it, because they are out and they are seeing that, oh, that was actually preparing me for where I am. And then the other thing that they thought they were helping was actually not helping. So I think that the alumni are in the real world, which is basically where our kids are heading to. And getting their input will be extremely vital to this collective work, because the students in here can share what they feel, which is extremely important, but then the holistic part of it may be missing if we don't look at those parts. But I had one technical question for you. In terms of the science, are they using NGSS here or no?
We're aligning now. New York has put its own spin on NGSS, so they
I know.
technically like the P12 science learning standards, but it's essentially NGSS.
Okay.
It's a 3D standards, 3 dimensions. So
Yeah.
I've been working very, very closely with Melissa Shandroff on this,
On that,
and we've been
yeah.
working, over the past few years, we had Helen Pashley that was supporting us, and very well received, very beloved, and currently very retired out of the blue. We are working together, Melissa and I, we issued an RFP. We are working to vet alternative expertise. And with this, it's actually very important. You know, I mentioned earlier, sometimes it's our internal expertise, sometimes it's books, sometimes it's external. this is one where having someone who's got a main line to New York State,
Correct.
thinking about like these are radically different standards. And what we've done is create basically all sorts of, like, my color-coded brain is very happy because we organized everything very methodically, and we worked with the teachers to define where we needed to prioritize alignment for different grade levels and different courses of study. And we have been doing that work over the last few years. And so, you know, in terms of just the state piece, you know, certainly those assessments will start soon. We still have time. We're in very good shape. I feel very proud of everyone for, you know, we've been moving forward very well with that, and also very quietly. You know, everybody's working really hard to do their alignment work over the past few years. But these new standards, they're great. It's really experiential. It's very phenomena-based. They're cross-cutting concepts. It's centered on the practices. So it's much, you know, as far as standards go, higher level critical thinking based on experience and phenomena. So they're fascinating, and it really requires that the learner takes the lead, which is very different instructionally. So we've been not only learning about the new standards, and aligning our units to those standards, but we've also been looking at instructional methodologies. So we still have a ways to go. Melissa and I are feeling really great about the work that's happening and very clear about the pathway forward. Again, which has been done with input from teachers and the building leaders. And we hope to have that consultant with a ribbon on soon.
Yeah, the reason why I brought that up was because I had the pleasure of teaching, that I got to know. I have taught alumni from here in college that I wasn't aware till later. But in particular, I'll say two students, of course, I'm not going to mention their names. One of them is actually in medical school now, and the other one was a non-science student. And one of the things that I met him, and we were talking some time back, and I think with I wasn't sure whether you're using NGSS or not, but I think the practice part, which is more which sometimes, I know the whole thing is more like a project-based learning kind of approach, but the practice part, which has the knowledge and content in it, sometimes is not emphasized. So then that is what is missing at the college level. So they come with the concept of science and understanding the bigger picture of it, but they sometimes lack the body of the content. And so anyway, I just wanted to share that as just sharing sake, that's all.
Thanks, obviously, always to Bill and Melissa, but I'd like to just, point out our finance department, Maureen, everybody that worked on that audit. It's always exciting to get done with that. I know you're right on to your next task, but to everyone, obviously, that you're working on it, that was an excellent audit, as we all mentioned earlier in the night. I'd like to just point out one other administrator who's not here, our athletic department director, Andrew Wendell. And I know it's not just this year, but I really appreciate how our community has homecoming not focused just on one sport. Decades ago, of course, it used to just be the boys' football team. And as we've run down the list, obviously, we have a fabulous weekend, and it includes JV girls sports. It includes, of course, boys soccer, varsity girls soccer. Volleyball is an indoor event, so maybe not as appealing to everyone else, but field hockey and football. So it's a really nice, diverse way for our community to celebrate. If anybody's in the mood for competitive high school athletics, you are in for a treat this weekend.
We have a motion to adjourn the meeting. Second?
Second.
All in favor?